There have been times that I was just sure that somebody was lying to me, but I helped anyway, or the church helped anyway. And there were times that I felt that somebody was lying and I chose not to help. I've helped people, and sometimes I've seen little to no thankfulness in them afterwards. And yet there's other times that when I've helped, or I've seen a church help, or been part of a church helping, I've seen somebody receive that help with incredible humility. I've seen them be grateful, and it's melted my heart when I've seen that happen. I remember one Saturday helping a single mom with multiple kids who was so distraught over what she was experiencing that she had no idea that the next day was Mother's Day. And she was positively overwhelmed when I reminded her what the next day was, how important it was, and how important her role was with her kids. I've had a wide variety of experiences throughout my lifetime. And so what have I learned? Well, the principle that I'd like to share with you this morning, you've heard me say it several times, the principle that I've learned is this. If our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right. And I'm absolutely convinced of that. If our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right, won't be right. So I ask you the question, not making an assumption, but I'm wondering, have you ever struggled to give with a pure heart? Is that ever difficult for you? Is that ever hard for you? Maybe you do struggle, maybe you don't. Maybe you struggle a little, maybe you struggle a lot. Have you ever helped someone and been so glad that you did? Have you ever helped someone and wished you hadn't? Have you ever wondered, what is the best way for me to help? And still been unsure. Even after the fact, regardless of whether you helped or not, have you sometimes been unsure if you did the right thing or if you did the best thing? Now, let's be really honest. Have you ever thought, if they would just get their act together, they wouldn't be in this mess? Have you ever thought that? Have you ever felt that?
Yes.
I will admit that on occasion I have, and I suspect that many of us have. It doesn't mean it's right, it doesn't mean we're proud of that, it doesn't mean we're thankful that that's how we approach things, but at times in life, we may have had that experience. Have you ever thought that could be me rather than them? Has it ever been something that crossed your mind? Have you ever felt guilty if you didn't help someone? Have you ever had second thoughts after you did help somebody? If you're like most people, and if you're like me, you probably do want to help others when there is a genuine need. Yet sometimes there is a struggle to know for sure. What do I do? Am I really helping? What will really help? What really will make the difference? Do you ever wonder why we have mixed feelings about helping people? My challenge and my suggestion this morning is, it's all about the heart. It's all about the heart. And if our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right either. So now I think about Scripture. Does Scripture suggest that our giving to those in need might be more about the heart than about the gift or about the need? I think Scripture does indicate that, and I'd like to do two things this morning. I'm going to walk through a number of Scriptures. I'll make several comments about the Scriptures, and then, based on what I have seen in those Scriptures and what I hope you will have seen when we review them, I will suggest quite a number of principles that I think would apply to our hearts if we want to do better at giving. The key text is Matthew 6, verses 1 through 4. This is what Jesus said. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. I think most of Jesus' words here are very plain and very clear. If we live well before others, hoping to be seen and praised, there is no eternal reward from God for that. Now, very specifically, Jesus said, when we help those in need, we should not make a big deal about it before other people, because we want them to notice, because we want them to honor us. Because if that is what we do, and I'm not suggesting that you do, but if that is what we do, that's it. That's the extent of our reward, whatever praise or honor we might receive from other people. So it might be that there's a choice to make between earthly praise and eternal praise, earthly rewards or eternal rewards. Jesus tells us that the best approach is to help secretly. So much so that if it were possible that our left hand would not know what our right hand has done. And in practice, what he was meaning is that one person doesn't even know what another person does in helping someone in need. The best approach is to help secretly. Now, I do think there's something incomplete about Jesus' words here. And we're not going to read the whole passage, all the rest of the verses in this chapter. They might indicate some similar things about not wanting to be seen by other people for what we do. But I think there's something that's incomplete, and I just want to clarify that a little bit. If you read carefully verse 4, and I'm going to read that verse again, so that your giving may be in secret, then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Is Jesus really suggesting that it is okay for us to help others in secret with the expectation that God will reward us? What do you think? Shake your heads yes or no. I imagine you shake your heads no from left to right. Well, I don't think so. I think what's meant here is really, it's meant to be a contrast. A contrast between human praise and godly praise. To keep us from wanting to tell other people or show other people what we do when we help others. I don't think it's meant to make a reward from God a motivation for helping other people. I think it's a difference between earthly recognition and eternal recognition. An earthly investment versus an eternal investment. There are a number of other verses that I'd like to read this morning. I'll read them fairly quickly. I'll make a couple of comments. But I think that they add to this whole concept about how important the condition of our heart is when we come to serving other people, to helping other people, to meeting the needs that other people have. I'm going to start in the Old Testament and move through the New Testament. The verses will all come in order. If you're following along, it should be fairly easy for you to move from one verse to another. Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 11. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. Well, what was true in the nation of Israel is true today. This side of eternity, there will always be needs to meet in other people's lives. The needs will never go away. The people who have needs will never go away. And sometimes that will be you and me, who are the people who have those needs. God's call for the Israelites was that they would hold their resources with an open hand, that they would share with others to meet their needs. I think God's call would be similar for us today, that we would hold our resources with open hands, willing to share with others, not holding to things so tightly that they have to be pulled away from us. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 17. Whoever is kind to the poor, listen to this, lends to the Lord. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. This is an interesting concept. The idea that helping someone in need is like lending to God. knowing that God will use the resource well, and God will then provide some kind of a reward or some kind of a blessing down the road. I think it's less about the reward, and it's more about the idea that we would trust God with our resources. We might not always trust, let's say this in terms of Gary. Gary might not always trust Gary. Gary might not always trust you. Gary might not always trust the person who has a need, but can Gary trust God? Can you trust God? Proverbs 22 and verse 9. The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. It can be easy to think that if we share with others, we'll end up with less because we're giving something away. Could this proverb be suggesting that when we share with others, we might actually be blessed? So that we not only have maybe the same amount of resources, but maybe that we even have more resources because we've shown ourselves to be faithful by helping somebody else. It's a principle that the heart that gives something away becomes more fulfilled and more blessed than the heart that keeps things tight-fisted. Matthew 25, verses 35 through 40. These are very familiar verses to you, but they're just so appropriate as we think about giving to others and helping others. Jesus said this in Matthew 25, beginning at verse 35. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Perhaps we need to reassess sometimes who we are actually serving and who we are actually helping. It's not that we aren't serving other people, because we are. It isn't that we're not serving our fellow human beings, because we are. But maybe that's not the right bottom line perspective for us to have. Jesus plainly says that when we provide food to a hungry person, a drink to a thirsty person, a place to stay to a stranger, clothes to a person who needs clothes, care to a person who is sick, and to visit to a person in prison, we're actually serving him, not just that person. Does that make a difference in how we view our service to other people? I think it can make a huge difference in the world if we recognize I'm just not serving a person around me, a fellow human being, I'm serving Jesus himself. Luke chapter 12, verses 33 and 34. Again, words from Jesus. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where do we invest? Where will we invest? Where do we look for a reward from investing? Is it investing on earth? That isn't all bad. Is it investing in eternity? That might be a little bit better. Jesus connects this contrast directly to helping people in need. Do we want to invest on earth where ultimately things wear out, things disappear, things get stolen, things get lost, things get worn out? Or do we want to invest from an eternal perspective that lasts forever? Jesus very clearly told us our heart will go with our investment. Wherever it is we invest, that's where our heart is. That's where our heart is. How much of our heart is invested in earthly stuff? And I'm not saying that we should never invest in earthly stuff, because we do plan ahead. That's okay, that's good. But how much of our heart is invested in earthly stuff, and how much of our heart is invested in heavenly stuff? And how would that impact how we help people in need if we recognize that not merely as an earthly investment, but we recognize it as an eternal investment? Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Paul wrote to the Philippian church and he said, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind." And then he says, well, what does that look like? What's the implication of that? Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Now, there are differences in how different Bible translations translate. This particular translation, which is the NIV, almost suggests that maybe we don't even consider our own interests, but that we only look at the interests of others. You should know that there are other Bible translations that translate that phrase, not looking to your own interests only, but also to the interests of others. Well, why would that matter? Well, do you have needs?
Yes.
I have needs. We have needs. We all have needs. But if our view of our own needs is so clouded that we can't see others' needs, we've missed, and according to these several verses, if that happens, we've missed the Spirit of Jesus. We've missed his tenderness. We've missed his compassion in our hearts. If it's ever all about me, or all about you, or all about us, we're in a very dangerous place. We're hardly humble, and we're hardly caring about the needs of others.
That's right.
It's okay for us to care about our needs, but not to the neglect of caring about and serving and meeting the needs of other people. Hebrews 13 and verse 16. "And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such," catch this word, "sacrifices, for with such sacrifices God is pleased." The writer of the Hebrews takes this concept a step further than what we've seen in some of the other verses and calls our sharing with others a sacrifice. Well, what is a sacrifice? When is it a sacrifice? Helping others may not always be a sacrifice, but sometimes it might be a sacrifice for us. What will your heart, what will my heart, what will our collective heart be willing to give up to meet the needs of another person? What would you give up? What would you be willing to sacrifice? What would you be willing to do without so that somebody else's need is met? What would I be willing to give up for somebody else? James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religious that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this. Catch this phrase right in the middle. To look after orphans and widows in their distress. To look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. When we have any familiarity at all with James' letter, we know that James talked very strongly of a faith or a religion or a belief that resulted in action. He wasn't interested in words, he wasn't interested in thoughts, he was interested in action. And in these verses, he urges believers to do at least three things. Two of those fall outside of our topic for this morning. He asks believers to watch their tongues very carefully. Is that important? Really important sometimes. He also asks them not to let culture influence them inappropriately. But the third thing is totally connected with today's sermon topic. He asks believers to look after the needs of others, and he specifically mentions orphans and widows. The context of these two verses suggests that if we don't take care of people with needs, orphans, widows, and otherwise, if we don't take care of people who have needs, that our faith and our religion might be, James might say, worthless. It's a pretty strong word, but that's what James might be willing to say. A genuine faith, a genuine religion in our hearts will lead us to serve other people. James chapter 2, the very next chapter, verses 15 and 16. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? The conclusion I draw, words are worthless without actions. A conversation with someone in need accomplishes nothing if no need is actually met or served. That might mean meeting the need directly with financial assistance. That might mean guiding them on a different path or a different direction so that they have the ability to meet the needs themselves or the need themselves. But words alone, without appropriate action, will rarely meet the need. One last verse. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 17. John wrote, "If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person?" Again, those are really strong words, but that's what John wrote. That's what God prompted John to write. He speaks loudly and strongly. He wonders, is it possible for the love of God to be in a person, in you and me, in us? Is it possible for the love of God to be in us, for us to have resources, for us to see a person who has a need and do nothing to help? John draws the conclusion that there's a problem there because all those things just simply don't fit together. With God's love alive in our hearts, we will see people's needs and we will help them with the resources that are available to us. As I review those scriptures, and hopefully you can draw the same conclusion as I do this morning as you think through the words of all those scriptures, some of my context, some of my comments, some of the thoughts that you had as you're thinking through those verses, the cumulative teaching of all the verses does draw me back to the same words that I've spoken a couple of times this morning. If our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right. So based on what we've read in Scripture, what is it that will make our heart right? What will make our heart right so that our giving is right? I usually don't like to share lots and lots and lots of principles because I think they can get lost. And I'm actually going to share 11 principles with you. They're not going to be numbered, so you don't have to keep track. But my whole point is that everything still comes back to the heart. So I don't want you to get lost in the quantity of principles. I do want you to be focused on the heart. And not just the heart, but your heart. What's going on in your heart when it comes to meeting the needs of other people? These are the principles that I see from Scripture. And again, I'm going to take every single one of them back to our hearts. Our heart is right when it doesn't need anyone to know about the gift we gave. Sometimes that means that our heart doesn't even need the receiver to know what we gave. It also means that our heart doesn't need a reward from God because we gave. Our heart is right when nobody needs to know anything about what we've done, anything about the need that we've met. That's when our heart is probably going to be a whole lot more pure. So that's one of the ways we know that our heart is right. Our heart is also right when it doesn't hold on to what we have with a closed fist because we have an open hand. Is what I have mine to use or available to share with others? Well, what's the right answer? Both are true. What I have is mine to use, but it's also available to share with others when my heart is in the right place. If I ever find myself literally having to pull back my fingers from something that is mine in order to give it to somebody else or to help somebody else, I probably need to look at my heart because something's going on in my heart that isn't pure and isn't godly. My heart is right, our heart is right, when we don't have to hold on to what we have with a closed fist. Our heart is right when it meets a need as though loaning that resource to God Himself. I think this is a valuable principle. Maybe we aren't sure that we trust ourselves to make the best choice. Do you always trust yourself to make the best choice about whether to help somebody else or not? A lot of heads are shaking, and they're not shaking like this, they're shaking the other way. Maybe we aren't sure that we trust the person that we are going to help to make a good choice. Will we trust God to use the resources that we invest in Him the right way? I may not be able to trust me. I may not be able to trust the other person. But is my heart willing to trust God regardless? If so, my heart is in the right place. Our heart is right when it feels blessed and joyful after giving, even when no one knows that we did. Even if no one knows. Even if we are not thanked. Even if the gift isn't well used. Even if we have second thoughts about giving the gift. Despite all of those things, when our heart still feels blessed, when our heart still feels joy, we know that our heart is in a right place and we're giving well. Our heart is right when it gives as though giving to Jesus Himself. Because in Jesus' view, that is exactly what we are doing. He said so. If Jesus made the request, would you give Him the gift? If Jesus had the need, would you help Him? If Jesus Himself suggested that we think that way, maybe we should think that way. Yes, give to the person, but give to Jesus first. Yes, help a person, help a family, help a need, but help Jesus first. Our heart is right when it focuses on eternal treasure above earthly treasure. What is our focus? What is my focus? I want to think about how I build for the balance of my life. I want to have investments. I want to make investments. I want to do that well because I want to be able to provide down the road. But building a treasure for this lifetime even if we can build a treasure, because there's no guarantee that we can, it's still for a limited amount of time. Building a treasure for eternity, a guaranteed treasure, by the way, that will never end. So, one of those two things, either treasures on earth or treasures in eternity, one of those two things will have our heart. That's what Jesus said. One of the two will have our heart, whether it's on earth or in eternity. So the question is, which will it be? Which will have our heart? Our heart is also right when it looks out not only for itself, but also for others. We have needs. And it's okay for our needs to be met. What is most difficult for us at times, especially because of the country we live in and how blessed we often are, it is very hard for us to do a good job of distinguishing between the need and the, what's the word? Want. Between the need and the want. We have needs and it's okay to meet them. Other people have needs as well, and sometimes we're in a place that we can meet or provide for that need. Meeting our needs should never overshadow meeting others' needs when God has blessed us with resources to help meet the need that they have. Our heart is right when it understands the gift costs us something. It is a sacrifice. Well, what is a gift to somebody else? A sacrifice. And, of course, that's going to be different for all of us. What's a sacrifice for someone on this side of the room is not the same as for a sacrifice for someone on this side of the room, which isn't the same as what's a sacrifice for me. What if meeting a need does bring at least a short-term sacrifice to us? What are we willing to give up for ourselves, even for our families, maybe even for our church family, to help someone else? Our heart is right when it cares deeply about others' needs and it hurts. Our heart feels another person's pain. Our heart is not completely right until we feel some level of pain or some level of discomfort about what another person is experiencing. Truthfully, we can't probably fully know or fully understand what they're going through, but let's be honest, something is wrong with our heart if we see somebody else have a need, we see somebody else suffering, and we don't feel anything. Our heart is right when it cares deeply, and it hurts because it cares deeply. Our heart is right when it moves beyond kind words to meaningful actions. Occasionally, kind words will meet a need. Now, if somebody is hurting emotionally, if somebody needs a friend, if somebody needs our time, sometimes words will make a huge difference. And if so, we should say those words. We should speak those words from our hearts. But almost always, our words must move to action, or the need remains unmet. Our heart needs to move from words to actions. Our heart is right when it is so profoundly filled with God's love, it is compelled to help meet others' needs. That's the heart that I would like to have more consistently, and that's the heart that I would like all of us to have more consistently. And I'm not saying that I don't have a heart that cares. I'm not saying that I don't have a heart that feels compelled at times to help other people. I'm not saying that you don't have a heart that feels compelled at times to help others. I'm just saying that I would like to see God's love take an even greater presence in my heart and in your heart, in our collective heart, that compels us to go even further in meeting people's needs. Those are all the needs, and they all come back to the heart. Those are very high standards for our hearts. But if it's true, and I think it is, that if our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right, those are pretty important standards for our heart. Giving does include a gift, right, of some kind. Giving does include meeting a need, some kind of a need. Giving does include a receiver, somebody that receives the gift, somebody who has a need that we meet. But it still comes back to the heart. How is your heart? How is my heart? How is our heart? Is our heart in the right place? What does our heart need to be a more wonderful giver? I can't answer that for any of you. I'm not sure I know exactly how to answer that for me. But whatever it is that we recognize, or God helps us to recognize that our heart needs to be in a better place, to be a better giver, let's ask God to do that. Let's seek that out from Him, maybe from each other. Because with a better heart, we will become a better giver. I want to remind you of what you really already know. Your gift from the heart can include so many different things. The very first thing that we think of when we think about meeting a need is giving what? Money. And sometimes that is what meeting the need takes. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's material, which is, I call that different from financial only in that it might be a thing that we give or a thing that we buy rather than the dollars. Do you have talents? Do you have abilities? Sometimes that's what you can invest in somebody else's life to help meet a need. Do you have time? Sometimes it takes time. And the truth is, there are times, using the word too many times, there are times that it's harder to use our time than it is to use our dollars, but it's actually the times that will be more valuable and will better meet the need than just our dollars.
Yeah.
Sometimes meeting a need means that we're a friend, that we care, that we love. Sometimes it means that we're just simply kind. Our world could use a whole lot more kindness. Sometimes we might call it love. We might call it reaching out from one heart to another heart. Sometimes it's just having a conversation with someone. And when I say a conversation, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're the ones who do most of the speaking. It may mean that we're the ones who do most of the listening. There are so many things that we can give to somebody else that will help meet their need. And when it comes from the heart, it's about a whole lot more than dollars. With such a heart, not only will people's needs be met, but we will be overwhelmingly changed. If we individually, as a church, become even more serious about the condition of our heart for the condition of our giving, we will be overwhelmingly changed. I believe that we'll love God differently. I believe that we'll love others differently. We'll have a different motivation to meet people's needs. Our very character will be changed. A changed heart will result in a changed life. Not just the person or persons being held, but us. And maybe the most outstanding change of all really is this. The outstanding change, it's in us. The outstanding change is not merely in the person or the persons being held, but the change is in me. The change is in you. The change is in this church, family, Cornerstone Bible Church. If we help other people, it will change us. It'll change our thoughts. It'll change our perspectives. It'll change our service to other people. Because the condition of our heart makes all the difference. If our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right. Going back to my confession at the very beginning of my words this morning, I recognize that at times I may still struggle to give with a pure heart. And I want to give you the opportunity to recognize that at times you may still struggle yourselves to give with a pure heart. But I want you to imagine this, which I said in other words earlier. Imagine having a heart so profoundly filled with God's love that you want to do nothing more than meet others' needs. Well, what would that look like? What would that feel like? Now, you fill in the blank in your heart, in your mind. Imagine Cornerstone Bible Church. Imagine us as a group, not just as individuals. Imagine us being filled with such hearts that together we want to do nothing more than meet people's needs. What would that look like? What would that feel like? Imagine the difference that would make in other people's lives, but even more, imagine the difference that would make in you. The difference that would make in me, the difference that would make in us. God will be faithful to create such hearts in us because he knows that if our heart isn't right, our giving isn't right. So the last question for you to think about this morning then is, how is your heart? Let's pray. Father, individually, we want to be Jesus followers who serve others well, who meet needs, who make a difference in other people's lives. And we want to be known as a church that meets people's needs, that brings healing to others' hearts and minds and lives. Father, by your presence in us, individually and together, please give us hearts so profoundly filled with your love and your presence that we want to do nothing more than meet others' needs. We ask for this in the name of your Son, Jesus.